Welcome to VLGA Connect. I'm Catherine Arndt and you're listening to the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Ho, 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 everyone, and welcome to TGU. It's our final edition of the year from VLGA Connect and sponsored by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Great to have you with us. And in all their Christmas finery this week, we have joining us Tony Rownick from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Hello, Tony.
Hey, Chris.
Julie Reid is back with us after not being able to join us last week, but great to have you back for our last show this year, Julie. How are you?
Yeah, Chris, good, much better now. So thank you. And I'm really pleased I could be back for the final one of the year to wrap up.
Excellent, and nice effort there with the tinsel, by the way, and making the biggest effort of all to be Christmassy. And joining us for our discussion today from the VLGA, Rhys Thomas. Hello, Rhys.
G'day, Chris. Great to be in the big show.
Indeed, with the big jacket, Rhys.
Well, if you own a jacket like this, you have to wear it every opportunity you get.
Indeed, and I've heard a rumor that
cobwebs.
I've heard a rumor that you've got the trousers to match.
Well, the rest of the rumor is that they haven't fit me for some time.
All right. Well, you don't need trousers on TGU, basically. That could be the title for the episode. All right. We're going to have a reflection episode. We'll look back at the year. We'll perhaps make some predictions about what's coming next year. A couple of news items around that we will talk about at the top of the show. I think Julie's got an award to hand out. This could be the start of something, our annual TGU awards, perhaps. And I believe we might even be able to squeeze in some poetry. What's that all about, I wonder? Stick around.
Exciting.
We'll find out. Yeah. So, Christmas is almost upon us, and then we get into January and Australia Day. And Team Australia Day is a topic again, with councils considering and some reconsidering their approach to January 26, such as Geelong this week, who've voted to have a report brought forward by the CEO on reversing a previous decision not to recognise the day as Australia Day. What do we make of this? There is a bit of a movement happening out there across the sector, Tony.
Yeah, definitely. I think this probably reflects one of those themes of the year, which I think came out through the election. I think there's probably that swing, not only a bit of that back to basics, but maybe even sort of away from some of the social activism that some of the councils have been involved in. Of course, the challenge at some of the councils, like Greater Geelong, has, as you say, has deliberated on this, a 7-4 decision to ask the CEO to deliver that report. There's been a consultation process last year, or certainly in relation to the prior decision, not to hold events on the 26th of January. Now there's been some sort of Facebook survey, I believe, but of course the councillors, or at least the majority of councillors, have come to the table and said, we're fairly confident that we represent a view out there in the community, and we want to see that view, I guess, implemented in the sense of, continuing to celebrate Australia Day on the 26th of January, pending any decision by the federal government to do otherwise. I think we're seeing this among a number of councils, and yet there are exceptions. There are councils that are maintaining the position that they won't acknowledge and celebrate Australia Day. Indeed, at least one council, I think Surf Coast Shire, puts the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag at half-mast on the 26th of January. I suspect that if we had a referendum where everyone had to vote, Australia Day on the 26th would probably win in the current mood in Australia. But there are different approaches at different councils.
And did I hear right that even though if Geelong do decide to go back to where they were, that it wasn't going to happen until 2026, that it was still going to be the current situation for 25. So it'll be interesting now to see what kind of response they get from the community, if they're going to delay that potentially for another year. So I don't know, but I think that this is becoming one of those really controversial issues that councils need to think about in terms of the timing as well, if they are going to be, reversing the decision, because it could upset quite a lot of the community.
I think timing is probably a factor here, Rhys, with
Yeah.
that report that needs to come back. And of course, there probably isn't going to be a council meeting, certainly in enough time to make changes for next
Yeah,
January
that's true.
26.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, citizenship ceremony will already be locked in. The certificates will have been printed and the guests will have been invited. So it was clearly too late to do that, but the elections only just happened. But I think what it shows me is that I think this council, at least, they've said they want to get out of the advocacy business in relation to Australia Day, basically. Because despite everything they said, what was their key message is Australia Day is a federal government responsibility. And
Yeah.
if Australia Day moves from the 26th of January, quite clearly Geelong will move its celebrations to a different date. But they've said they're going to stop advocating, they're going to stop avoiding using the term Australia Day. I just hope that they don't get out of the advocacy business completely. And this is just one issue that they've decided that they don't want to play a role in.
Yeah, look, it's that whole discussion, isn't it, that happened pre-election around what is the role of councils. And there's been a lot of pushback, which I think is understandable too, from councils getting involved in issues that aren't seen as local government responsibilities. They're seen as the purview of other levels of government.
Well, look, so my opinion is surely this is a national decision. Surely we want to see our National Day celebrated consistently across the country, whether it's on the 26th or on another day.
Yeah, we
That's
don't
just
want
my view. I
councils.
don't see why there ought to be, across the border of a municipality and it changes. I just think that's crazy.
That's right. We don't want councils being compared against each other. We want the communities to feel united as one, not saying, well, why are, my neighbouring council doing it differently to us. So I think I agree with you, Tony. I think that national position needs to be really clear, and maybe there needs to be a message coming nationally about, where we stand with all of this, and maybe a message back to the councils about that as well.
I have a slightly different view, I guess. I suppose is a national decision made in Canberra and then the message coming out to local governments, not really the way we should be making decisions. It should be informed by community voices. So for those councils that want to continue to advocate, I'm on board with that. And for those that want to focus their attention somewhere else, then that's all right too. It's up to those communities to decide what issues they want to weigh in on.
There was opposition to it, of course. There were protests at the council meeting, quite a bit of media on it. A former councillor, and she wasn't always identified in the media as being a former councillor, was quite publicly saying it's a step backwards and it's going to affect relationships with First Nations communities. Do we have sympathy for that argument?
Well, they're part of the community. They are often clearly an important part, and they have a particular connection to this decision, but they're not the only part of the community, is what I would say to that. And look, I think if there was a referendum and everyone had to vote based on the results in the election in the city of Greater Geelong, then they'd have overwhelming support for Australia Day on the 26th if everyone voted. So if we're going to talk about what's the community wants, we have to be very, you're talking about what the majority of the community want or what a particular group of loud voices want, and validly they ought to have an opinion and a say. But I suspect I strongly suspect the decision of the council reflects the view of the majority of voters in that community.
Okay, so we've got a few slightly different views there, which is terrific to see. So can we agree, though, that this issue of how January 26 gets recognised from a local government perspective is not just a theme for the year gone, but it's going to be a theme going into 2025, one that we'll keep an eye on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not going to go away. We're probably going to be discussing it this time every year.
Yeah. Look, another theme from the year that I think gives us a sense of where we're at in the sector in Victoria is the use of municipal monitors. There are 10 in place at the moment. Some of those are about to wrap up at the end of this month, and I think another one at the end of January. But we've just had the Brimbank monitors, Janet Doran, Penelope Holloway, extended through to next June by the Minister this week. And I know there's been a bit of political pushback on the use of monitors across the sector. So we put that in the column of a theme of the year, do we think? I know it's not
I
just a
think so.
2024 thing, but certainly it's solidified, hasn't it?
Yeah, and remember we saw the change in the monitors in terms of going from one monitor to two monitors into the councils, and the continuous increase in the amount of monitors that are going into councils. Predictions about that? Are we predicting that there's going to be maybe some more councils that are going to be replaced by administrators in the next 12 months, Chris? What do we think? What's our prediction? Do we think it's going to stay at monitor level, or do we think there's going to be some turning points next year? I don't know.
I'm not touching that one, Julie. Rhys is the governance expert in the team at the moment. What do you think,
Well,
Rhys?
I'll weigh in on it. I'd be surprised if we saw councils go into administration in the next 12 months unless
Okay.
something egregious happens, only because they're new councils. And so patterns of behaviour can't yet have developed, and they'll be given a chance to resolve it themselves. So then we look to year two and say, well, will it happen in year two? Well, there's a state election in year two. And then so you start asking yourself the question, well, is there a political overlay to this? Clearly,
That's right.
been in the past. Maybe year 3 and 4, perhaps we'll be talking about it a lot more. We'll have a lot more content for our panel, because that's when the wheels start to fall off a little bit.
I just had to ask that question because I think we need to keep our eye on that and see how the new, new legislation, the new model code of conduct is going to be working for us. Is it going to mean we're going to have better behaviours overall? Are people clearer about their roles? Are councillors clearer about their roles? What I'm saying, is it going to be, better this term than last term? I'm not sure, and holding that as a question about what's going to happen. And you might be right, Rhys, it might not be the first year or two, but we'll watch it closely and see how these behaviours in relation to the model code of conduct unfold. It'll also be interesting, I think, to see whether or not we get the same amount of arbitration cases. And I think that'll be one thing that I know Tony's going to be watching pretty closely. What are those arbitration cases that are coming forward, and are there trends in relation to that? Because we've seen some really strong trends this year, particularly in relation to social media. Now that all this training has happened, is that going to reduce? Are the councils going to look at more internal processes to be able to resolve some of those issues before they go to arbitration? So these are all the questions that are in my governance mind at the moment about how much difference all of this is going to make to what's going on out there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Julie, to look out for is there's a new power now for the minister to stand down or dismiss an individual councillor. So I think we might see that happen before we see councillors move into administration.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm hoping that the minister will use her powers in that respect before targeting the whole council. I would expect that would be the case. That's the reason why they've brought it in, I'm assuming, because we know that the majority of councillors will do the right thing. And there's really only usually a handful that create problems for the sector.
I guess another indicator, Tony, is going to be councillor resignations. This is one that we watch fairly closely, and we've already had our first for this term. A first-term councillor at Golden Plains has announced their resignation this week for personal reasons. I forget what the number was in the last term, but it got up pretty high. It's
50-something, I think, wasn't it? I think he got up into the 50s, Chris. So I'd be interesting to watch and compare last term to this term.
Yeah. Well, look. In this instance, as you've cited, Councillor, I think Lachlan Glenn is your chap's name, who was his first time councillor. Got a pretty strong vote in field of 10. I think he got 19% in a field of 10 candidates there in Golden Plains, but has has lasted about a month and indicated he's stepping down for family reasons. I think demands of family he's cited. I'm not quite sure the detail there. But yeah, we do in this early phase sometimes see first-time candidates reassess, or successful first-time candidates reassess their position when they learn the demands of being a counsellor and some of the realities of being a counsellor. It's just one of those things that occurs, and we've grown to expect to see a little of that. It's unfortunate, but with the countback arrangements, at least it's not requiring the community to sort of come forward and go through that expensive exercise of voting once again.
Do we think, given the new requirements on training, induction, etc., that a side effect of that might be? I've always been concerned that new councillors aren't fully prepared for the role. They don't fully appreciate the responsibility and the time commitment that they're taking on. I imagine that's laid pretty bare with these new induction requirements that are being rolled out for new councils.
Yeah, I also wonder about the timing of elections. They might work in a metropolitan area, but if you're on the land in rural Victoria, this is a very busy time of year. It's harvest time. Anyone who's running a farm that's cropping at the moment, it's going to find it very difficult to be out there during the day attending council or inductions. And maybe we need to sort of think that one through, because I know there's been some real challenges in some of the rural communities in relation to those sort of demands that are placed on their councillors at this time of year.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tony, because I think that we do often forget about, those kind of demands that are different to the demands in Metro. So, yeah, really, really good point. And I think that, the councillors that will be listening to the podcast that are rural councils that are
I'll be on a
trying to
tractor somewhere,
harvest
don't
will
worry.
be going, yes, Tony, yes, it's really hard. But anyway, good on you. Yeah, it's nice to get that perspective.
The other thing I wouldn't mind seeing, there's a couple of things. One is the pre-candidate training, because it would appear, and certainly from my visits around councils in recent weeks, and I'm sure Tony and Julie, you've experienced the same, sometimes when you map out for people what's involved in being a councillor, you see a couple of people just go wide-eyed and it starts to sink in. So to be honest, I'm surprised there's only been one. I wouldn't be surprised if people start to come back in the new year and we lose another couple.
Yeah.
So a requirement for pre-candidate training would be great. So at least their eyes are widened before the election day. But, I understand the restriction for that. The other possible change could be, it could be made possible to use countbacks for single member wards, even if it was only for a vacancy that occurred within a certain time of the election, perhaps, the first 6 months or something. Because in this case, we got lucky, but if this had happened in Melbourne, some council would be out $200,000 engaging a new election now. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's problematic, I think. I would agree.
All right, so there's a theme from last term and one that we'll be watching coming into this new term. Another theme that's emerged, and I know a lot of people are watching very closely, open briefing sessions. So Mornington Peninsula Shire is being looked at very closely at the moment. My mail is that the new council will continue down the path of opening their briefing sessions in a public sense. And this has come in a week where another council, Hume City Council, has passed a resolution this week. It was a motion from one of its councillors to refer a matter of a leaked recording from a councillor briefing session. Apparently part of the recording was aired on social media during the election campaign. The council wants that to be referred to the integrity agencies and even Victoria Police around whether there's something criminal involved here. I might go to Rhys first, because I know you've got some views about whether this is a storm in a teacup or not, Rhys.
Well, I'm not convinced there's any criminal behaviour. That would be surprising. You're allowed to record conversations that you're a part of or witness to in Victoria, so I can't see that. The other thing is it's important to note that the apparent breach occurred prior to the election. And the reason that's relevant is because the new model code of conduct came into account on election day, and it includes a provision around a councillor not making council information publicly available where public availability would be contrary to the public interest. So that's a new provision, wasn't in the old model code. And it would arguably apply in this case, but of course it didn't exist. So, I think probably it's nothing to see here. Like, I think it's unfortunate, and I don't think it's good behaviour. And I think it's a signal that the council aren't working or weren't working together well as a team. But as for whether there's been a material breach, I suspect there probably hasn't been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Tony?
there's that two regimes here. So under the Local Government Act, as you say, Rhys, there's certainly as it applied at the time, where we didn't have the model code of conduct at the time, there's not a lot of prescription around, what is the position in relation to council briefings, workshops, etc. We've got the Glenelg Monitor report, which came out this year, that reflects on, there's a definition of confidential information in the Act, but beyond that, there's certain documents that are to be regarded as confidential as a matter of good governance, and they might be matters that are or documents that are shared or information that's shared at a council briefing. But yeah, there's not that clear prescription. In relation to the more general law, there is that element about it is not unlawful to record a conversation that one's a part of. I think the next question is, well, what about when you pass that recording on to a third party who wasn't a part of the conversation? And that would be the potential criminal breach here. But I think that what this is really calling for is, if we do have model governance rules, there's some clarity around not only the conduct of council meetings, but potentially, what are the rules around the conduct of briefings, and even those councils that have chosen to open up their briefings, there will be an element of going into confidence, closing to the public to discuss a confidential item. What are the rules then in relation to that scenario? And finally, I think that perhaps we will see a mandated move towards some form of light minutes of council briefings that might actually solve this concern about transparency of briefings without, opening them up to a wholesale, the public just view the whole exercise.
My guess is, Chris and Tony and Rhys, I think there's quite a few councils out there that are watching what's happening at Mornington, and quite a few of them are getting pressure, I think, from their councillors to have a look at what the options are available to them to have a more transparent sort of approach in relation to briefings. Whether they will all agree with the Mornington Peninsula opening it at wider open to the public, I don't know, but I think that they're looking for what else can we do to be able to be more transparent. And what you're talking about, Tony, is that, the treatment of the minutes, etc. So I think they're looking for options at the moment, which is will be an interesting space for us to watch, to see what kind of innovation comes out of this from councils.
I guess one of the key things is how it works at Mornington Peninsula, and whether it works well. People will be watching. If it raises a lot of issues and causes problems, perhaps some might back away. But my view is that this is a coming tidal wave. In New South Wales, the government is about to outlaw private briefing sessions. A lot of councils are opposing this, but it's part of reforms that the New South Wales government are introducing. And of course, open briefings exist in other states as well. and in New Zealand, where the Ombudsman has come out very, very strongly and criticised councils that have closed workshops, which is their term for briefing sessions. So it just feels like this is a movement that's coming, and Mornington Peninsula's sort of leading the way here. But I think we're going to see more discussion about this in future, not less.
Yeah, and I think the discussion around the model governance rules, I think, you know, that's coming as well. And I think it'll be interesting to see, maybe, Rhys, you've got some more update about where that's up to with the government and when we're likely to see that come forward. But certainly the integrity reports that we have seen recently have said, you know, to the government, we should have those model governance rules. And what is the sector's view going to be on this for those model governance rules?
Yeah, all I know is it's apparently next. So
Right,
presumably
yeah, I
that
assume
means
that.
hopefully earlier part of the year than later. But you know, it's a
Yeah.
big job. The governance rules
Yeah, I know.
are very sophisticated, and every council has its own behaviour. So I think they'll probably end up having to have some kind of core governance rules that councils can then build on, would be my thought about where it'll end up. But you know, watch the space.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess connected to that, councillor behaviour, that's been a theme of the last term. I'm expecting it'll continue to be a theme, and again, not just in Victoria. We've seen some councils take more extreme measures to protect safety of council meetings. I notice Yarra Rangers this week has confirmed that those arrangements they put in place when things got a little bit heated there quite a few months back are going to remain in place. That is the use of external security and a barrier of some sort. Of course, Rhys, Yarra quite famously introduced a barrier, the wall it was called. I think you even put pen to paper about that issue, didn't you?
I did write a poem on that one. I'm not going to share that one with you. It's a little bit spicy, but no, I mean, clearly security at council meetings is going to be a feature, and that's not surprising because councils are, it would appear, attracting more and more controversy, and with controversy comes risk. And you know, even though some councillors might say, well, bring it on, I'm up for it. Well, there's other councillors and there's members of staff and there's other members of the public who should be able to come to meetings safely without feeling like there's going to be a threat. So, yeah, I think we're going to see more of it. But unfortunately, yet again, it adds an expense. It's yet another cost that councils have to meet. And what once upon a time was a fairly straightforward, fairly affordable thing has now become quite the process.
Yeah. I've got one more on my list of things that characterise the previous term and may characterise the next term, and that is the movement of CEOs around councils into and out of the sector. I think, look, again, I haven't crunched it, but I think probably a record number of changes in the last term. We've got 9 councils currently either in the market or about to go to market for a new CEO, and there's a mix there of metro and regionals. So that's going to be a theme in the months ahead. And I noticed a story this week out of the US that I was really keen to get perhaps Rhys and Tony's thoughts on, where a regular commentator over there has made a point that they're starting to see clauses in city managers' contracts that they can't be removed within a period before and after an election, which I thought was a really interesting thing to be adding to an employment contract. It certainly doesn't operate that way here, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it would. It's, you know, these restrictions on the power to remove that, key employer. I'm probably not a fan of, frankly. I just think that both the employed party, the CEO, and the council do have access to the courts here if there's a question of interpretation of a contract, and ultimately I think that that having a scenario where you have a majority of the councillors aggrieved and not comfortable working with the CEO is just untenable, and sort of forcing and maintaining that situation is problematic. Certainly there may be provisions for appropriate compensation for ending employment earlier. But I just don't, the idea that you'd have the two parties forced to work together, and it's happened on the odd occasion, I think is a recipe for ongoing dysfunction.
Yeah, I would agree, Tony. You've effectively have there would be nothing to stop a council sending the signal that they didn't have the confidence in the CEO, and you'd have this lame duck CEO running out the clock until such a time as they could be dismissed. And in fact, you may even have the appointed successor sitting there in the room alongside them during that period. It wouldn't be good, I don't think, for the council. So yeah, look, not a fan, but I wouldn't mind seeing a change that makes it slightly more difficult for a council to move on a CEO. One thing that would be very easy to introduce is a requirement that a decision in relation to the CEO's contract would have to be made by an absolute majority of the council. So at the moment, that's not necessary. So if you've got a council of 9 and 2 of them are absent, then 4 councillors in that situation could vote unilaterally to terminate a CEO, even though they don't represent a majority of the council. So that would be an easy fix, I think. But I'm not sure that we're seeing necessarily a pattern of wild and reckless CEO dismissals.
No.
There's always going to be turnover, of course, and I think that's probably what we're seeing.
Interesting. I think the one thing that I can say that's probably more positive in this space is, travelling around the state recently and hearing great stories of councillors that are really happy with their CEOs that they've got, that they're working with, that it's a really great relationship, and they're more fearful that their CEOs, particularly in those more remote areas, will leave and they'll be left, having to try and find someone else come into their community. So I think just from the other side of the story that I'm hearing is there's a lot of great work going out there, and there's lots of really good relationships between councillors and CEOs in Victoria. So I was really heartened to hear that as part of this process.
And apropos of the earlier discussion about the responsibilities on brand new councillors and getting themselves up to speed. Some of these councils that are looking for a CEO have got brand new councillors who are now having to think about this very, very significant decision that they've got to make in a short period of time. I feel for them. It's a huge. It's probably the biggest decision they'll make as a council, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite overwhelming for them, and you have to sort of. With a few of them, I've reassured them that you'll have someone there that's a recruitment person that will help you, and you've got your independent person that sits on your committee, and so they'll help steer you through the process. But these are people that have never been in, these are councils that have never been in leadership positions and never employed staff in their life, So it is quite significant for them, and they're really nervous about getting it wrong. So it's a little bit about understanding the process and building their confidence around that.
Yeah, and I think one positive development is the use of interim CEOs. I think that seems to be a relatively new phenomenon. It used to be as soon as your CEO left, you just hired a new one for 5 years.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing more of these, let's appoint someone for 6 to 9 months or 12 months or whatever it is, and so that we're ready and in a position to know what it is we want, and we've got the skills to get the right person. So, and there's clearly a good pool of people who are putting their hand up for those jobs. There's some pretty impressive people taking up those interim roles.
They sure are.
Yeah.
All right, that was what I had on my list of themes and issues. Tony, anything that's come to mind for you?
Yeah, I did. I actually wrote 3 down. So in ascending order, I had, and probably just a theme having been on the road, but once you're outside the metro area in Melbourne, in virtually every regional and rural council, I'd say the biggest capital works issue is the state of the roads. And I think that's a big theme across Victorian councils, and the community dissatisfaction with the state of the roads, and problematically that many of the roads that the community is dissatisfied with and are marking council down for are actually state government maintained roads. So community satisfaction surveys are the community are saying the roads are in a dreadful state, but councils having to pay a little bit extra money to get the community to the survey to identify, well, what roads, and often we're finding these are state government maintained roads. And as we know, the Victorian government's finances are probably the worst in Australia. It's not likely to see any, we're not likely to see any turnaround in terms of state government maintenance of roads given the state of the budget. So I think in 2025, that'll be an enduring issue in those rural and regional councils. The other theme I had was the conduct reforms. Clearly, this is going to have long-standing impact on councils. The reforms we saw this year, with a lot of input from both the council or representative bodies like VLGA, MAV, but also from the staff representative bodies like LG Pro. There was an overwhelming theme that the 2020 conduct reforms weren't as fit for purpose as they ought to be. That and that council laws were choosing not to use those processes, having sort of once bitten, twice shy. Found out that they were very convoluted, involved, and often the outcomes weren't satisfactory or the sanctions were minimal. It remains to be seen, as Julie said earlier, will councillors have another go? Will perhaps some of those newly elected councillors dip in and try to use these processes? And perhaps even more importantly, will arbiters and council conduct panels be willing to exercise, the full range of sanctions available to them now? Will we see councillors suspended for periods approaching or up to 12 months for serious misconduct over the next three to 6 months? I think that to me will be really, really interesting. The willingness of the decision makers to apply these much more severe sanctions. And then finally, my third theme was just the election outcome. I think it's undoubtedly been a mood swing across the state. It's not. It's definitely, there are exceptions, but I think there is that swing away from the socially activist type council towards the back to basics, if I can, simplify it in that way. Clearly there were many council laws elected who ran on those back to basics platforms, and that there was a strong message from the constituency that I want to see more of that. And I think this is a theme that is occurring across the state. And we talked about Australia Day earlier. I think that's just one of a myriad of matters we'll see different approach at councils on over the next 4 years than perhaps we had seen last term.
Tony, on the conduct issues, good points, all of those. I'm reminded that there's probably at least 2 cases still outstanding from the last term.
Yeah.
The Wyndham case, which is being challenged in court, I believe, and one with a former councillor taking action about an arbiter decision at Hobson's Bay. So obviously those decisions will have some sort of relevance going forward.
Yeah, and there's a general rule at law that we don't retrospectively apply, sanctions. So one would presume that those cases which relate to matters of conduct that occurred under the previous arrangements will be judged under the previous arrangements, and the sanctions, if any, will be applied through the previous arrangements. But I have some skepticism as to the availability of the conduct regime for former councillors. Whether there'll be a willingness to even address this against former councillors.
Thank you, Tony. Julie, any thoughts from you on
Yes.
themes
Oh,
emerging?
gee, Chris and Tony, they're really interesting points that you've made already. And with Rhys's contribution on the governance side today, it's really interesting the space we're in. So I've been reflecting a lot on all of that. The other thing I've been reflecting on is, and I mentioned it earlier on, is this whole social media space that we're in at the moment, and how, we've got councillors that are struggling with the inappropriate use of social media. They're coming unstuck as a result of social media. We've also had calls from councils to get out of certain social media. Remember the Chippenham Town
I
Council
do.
got
Yes.
out of the media platform X due to the inappropriate content and decline in engagement. And so we're starting to see now councils thinking about the use of social media and thinking about what's appropriate for the council platform. And I note very helpfully that the VLGA have put out a note on, and Rhys might want to comment on this, a note around social media and the use of social and the development of social media policies. So I think that's a really hot item at the moment. And I know, talking to a number of councillors about the use of social media, they're really nervous about that space. But with a lot of younger councillors coming in to the fold as well, that is just normal for them to use social media all the time. We remember when we had a freedom of information request that went to a council to get the access to the Teams chat that was at a council meeting. That was quite a significant situation that happened recently, which I think was ultimately declined. But, these are the types of things that we're facing now in local government. The other thing,
Before you get off social media,
yeah,
I'm not sure whether Rhys wants to jump
you
in here,
may want to
because I think
comment.
that's something you're doing some work on at the VLGA, aren't you, Rhys?
Yeah,
around-
we have. We've just this week actually we released a model councillor social media policy for the sector, which doesn't
Yeah,
seek to introduce any new restrictions. What it does is it explains for councillors what all the restrictions are, and because there's a lot of them and they're complicated. So you've got to be aware of issues like, well, in the last 48 hours, we've seen at the state political level what happens in the defamation space if you put a foot wrong. Councillors can be exposed to those sorts of risks on social media. There's copyright, there's privacy, there's confidentiality, there's release of health information. There's this new provision in the model code about releasing council documents contrary to the public interest. There's lots of stuff. So we've put that all in a model policy, and we'll actually be doing a bit of training for councillors in the new year on that.
yeah,
Excellent.
great.
I
That's
thought
good
you might
news.
like to give
So,
that a plug. And before we go back to Julie and your list, for the governance geeks who like to research what other councils are doing, I note that Newcastle City Council in New South Wales this week adopted a new social media policy and a media policy. It was subject to, I think I'm right in saying, about 2 hours of debate in a meeting that went 7 hours and 45 minutes and finished at 2 o'clock in the morning.
gosh.
So
It gives you an idea of how challenging it might be to write a model
Yeah.
policy for the sector.
exactly
Yeah,
right.
I
Yes.
think it's a big issue, and I think
Mm.
that we'll be talking about this a lot more next year.
Mm.
Chris, the other thing I will say, it's been a bumper planning year for us. And being a planner, as you know, I've had my sights on what's been happening in the planning space. Obviously, there's been some major announcements by the government throughout this year, and a lot of it has focused around housing and affordable housing and getting the numbers of housing that we need and getting targets set and all that kind of stuff that's been really controversial with the local communities, and it's been hard for the councils to navigate through, and councils expecting more consultation around all of this. It's been a big planning year. We celebrated World Planning Day, which I know that you are all now very familiar with, and World Town Planning Day, I should say. And I know you're going to celebrate that now every year, and I know Rhys is in my camp around that. And I know that over the year we've attracted new listeners that are planners who are interested in hearing our views around the planning space. So watch this space from those listeners.
Well,
But
hang on, Julie, before you go on, it's a great segue for me to deliver the first of my poems. So
Oh,
if you
excellent.
bear with
Oh,
me,
okay.
I have a planning related poem for you, and
Fantastic.
it's called Mullumbimby. And if you just bear with me, I'll read it. And it goes, my thoughts quickly collected when a call came unexpected. Mum had fallen. It was time to get that loan. A brand new unit I would build her, because her old place nearly killed her in the backyard where my lawn was freshly mown. So I chatted to my neighbour, which is a most unpleasant, can't be printed. Let's say Joan. And then the council planner, in a calm and pleasant manner, explained the covenant, the overlay, and zone. Now I was worried, as expected, because my neighbour's quite connected and she's got the mayor's number in her phone. But then my planning consultant told me I would be triumphant. As of right, they said, let her whinge and moan. And the best bit was Joan's deck, which she fell off and broke her neck. Had no permit, now she has to sell her home. So the moral of this tale is the planning scheme prevails, something the NIMBY from Mullumbimby should have known.
Oh,
Very
very
clever.
good, Rhys. Very good.
That is, and
That
and
is,
I have
I'm
to
glad.
confess, I've heard Rhys read that once before, and I reckon you put that to music, and John Williamson would record it.
Fantastic. Well, on the planning theme and on the housing theme, Chris, I'd like to announce that I'd like to give an award to a council this year
Oh,
for their amazing leadership in the housing and the planning space. And I would like to give that award this year to Yarri Ambiac Shire Council and to Tammy Smith, the Chief Executive Officer, for showing amazing leadership in this space. As you recall, I think in April this year, Tammy announced on LinkedIn that they had officially handed over 7 affordable housing units. I think that was in Murtoa. And that was a project that they worked on with the Victorian State Government and through the Regional Infrastructure Fund to enable this to happen. I thought this was amazing leadership. And I even believe that it might have been our very own Tony Rownick who actually stayed in one of those units when he was up there training the council. So, the benefits have come back to this panel, I believe.
I did stay in a council. It was in Warwickville, but that they've got some great initiatives up there, and that so they need to accommodate got a real housing issue in regional Victoria, not just in Metro Melbourne. So some great thinking outside the square by Yarri Ambiac and a number of other councils are doing this across Victoria. It's a great idea. Well done.
Julie.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to recognise, because they're such a small council and just punching above their weight. And I know and recognise what Tony's saying is a lot of councils are getting in this space now. I think it's amazing leadership, and I think it's just fantastic what they're doing. And I say keep up the great work for 2025.
Is there a trophy or something that goes with that award?
Oh,
Julie?
look, yeah, we'll have to get that onto the web page, I think. The virtual trophy that goes to Yarri Ambiac. Thank you.
Excellent.
And look, I can't go without mentioning, to finalise the year for me, is that Chris, I know, and Tony, I know you were so excited about the entrance of Taylor Swift to Melbourne at the MCG, an absolute frenzy in Melbourne that I know you really, really enjoyed at the time, and you really enjoyed me raising this. We are sadly seeing the end of the Eras tour, and I just wanted to let you know that you've missed the boat. But next time when she is in town, I will be there lining up to get us tickets, and we will do a live podcast from.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
From the next.
Chris and I will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't miss out next
we'll
time.
find a way to be out of the country on that particular day.
I know you'll have Mark Dupay there with you. Mark's a big fan. He enjoyed
Great. Well, I'll make sure I rope him in as well. It's a big Swifty year, and I just wanted to reflect on that because we had a lot of fun in that episode.
Well, and big business. Many cities did very well out of the economic impact from having that tour roll into town.
Yeah.
Rhys, any reflections from you, or would you like to share more poetry?
Well, I've got reflections with poetry mixed in.
Okay.
I mean, as you know, I joined the VLGA during this year, so that was my highlight. And not very long after joining, I went to Canberra for the ALGA meeting. Now I've been in local government. I know about this ALGA meeting, and councillors and senior staff disappear, but I've never actually been before. And it was really interesting because what you see at Alga is the sheer diversity of local government across the nation. In fact, I'm sure there were some delegations there where the entire council, every councillor and employee, was all there, and they shared the same taxi to the conference centre. That there's some very different sized municipalities,
including some
out
from
there.
Melbourne, Rhys.
Yeah, including.
Yeah.
And we talk about, because they get the news, we talk about the big ones typically on this panel. We hear about what's happening in Townsville and Brisbane and Sydney and all those places, but we don't hear about what's happening in Arnhem Land or northern Western Australia. And there's some really important work that's important to local communities going on, and you get a real opportunity to get an insight into what it is to be a councillor. So I think to any councillor that has always wondered whether or not it's worth a trip to Canberra, if the opportunity presents, I think you should go. I think it renews your faith in why you decided to become a councillor in the first place, and it gives you an opportunity to meet people who are facing similar challenges or very different challenges, and sort of share your thinking with them. So I've got a poem about Alga.
So before you do that, the other thing that occurs to me, Rhys, is all of those things I agree with, but it also allows you to appreciate the weather from wherever you've come from when you go to Canberra.
And I'll let the TGU viewers in on a little secret. If those fervent watchers will have seen my live cross from Canberra, where I stood outside in my chilly scarf. Well, I have to admit that I recorded that in my warm study here in Box Hill. So sorry about that. But, through the magic of TGU,
it was the fraud of the
much
year.
like Canberra. So my poem, Alga. A Canberra weekday in July. There's no one here. I wonder why. From all across the land they come. The wind's so cold, their hands are numb. Councillors from far and near, hoping they can bend an ear. Their city's different, but the same. They're all playing the funding game. And when it's done, they set their course. Their shoes are worn, their voices hoarse. They argued hard, used all their tricks. But in the end, it's politics.
Very good.
You've got a
Well done.
talent. That's extraordinary.
And look, the other thing,
Banjo Patterson of the
Of the
2020.
VLGA.
the other thing I was going to comment on, and my last poem,
Yeah.
I noticed that in the news this week that the councillor from Cumberland City Council, Steve Christou, who was responsible for, or led, I suppose, initiated the short-lived book ban that they had there earlier this year, has joined the Libertarian Party in New South Wales. And he's done that this week, which is a puzzling choice because the Libertarian Party essentially stands for small government, staying out of everyone's personal business and staying out of the way. But how you balance that with wading into what books people should be reading, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, good point.
But
Maybe he's learnt his lesson.
the Libertarian Party's doing sort of oddly well in New South Wales at the moment, and I think some of that's on the back of the failure for the Liberal Party to successfully nominate so many councillors at those New South Wales elections. So people saw Libertarian on the ballot and just kind of assumed, I think. So who knows how short-lived this will be. People that tend to join parties midstream sometimes don't stick around. We see that kind of.
Yes.
He's clearly not born into this party. It's just presumably convenient for him. But I have a poem that I wrote quite some time ago when all of that book ban was going on, and it's called Cumberland. I'll read that one to you. It goes, the rooms were full of dusty tomes, the building grand with light-filled domes. Thousands lined these oak-clad walls, yet never left the empty halls. They're filled with tales of times long past, of stories that we thought would last, and all those paintings of our lives are filled with children, men and wives. The boy went looking down the aisles and rummaged through the messy piles, and slowly the realisation comes, no book for you, you've got two mums.
Oh, very smart.
Very good.
Boy, how can we top poetry? I'm expecting that this time next year, Chris, you'll be singing some kind of Christmas jingle or something to close us out. Would that be right?
No, probably
No,
not.
I think Rhys is close.
Well, I have chatted to Chris about maybe my segment next year should be all poetry all the time, but I'm not sure that those 3 poems that I've read today have taken me the year to develop. So I
Wow,
don't know that I
yeah.
could come up with 52 of them.
No.
No, fair enough.
It does top last week's Rhys with a spoon effort.
It was my low point. However, what I will now be doing for Julie is including Taylor Swift references in all of my statements. So from now and
Thanks, Rhys.
forevermore.
Thank
And a
you.
little tip, they tell me if you put Taylor Swift in the description of your podcast or the title, you get a lot of extra listeners.
Well,
do.
combine that with the reference to pants being optional, and I reckon you might be right.
All right. Yes, as we said at the start, you don't need trousers for TGU, and I don't think we need anything more. We've covered the whole gamut today. Thank you all for those reflections. Any final Christmas, New Year thoughts, Tony?
No, just looking forward to a break, and then seeing you all and talking to our avid viewers and the sector again sometime after New Year, sometime in later January, maybe. I'm not sure when we will be doing it, but we'll be back. That's a commitment.
Yeah.
As I said to the team this week, after the tennis, as they say on Channel 9 or whichever channel it is, for me, everything's after the tennis.
Yeah.
Julie?
Oh, Chris, look, it's been such a bumper year and everybody's really exhausted. I've been talking to a lot of staff from local government and they're all really tired and they're going, is it Christmas? Are we at Christmas yet? Are we getting close? And they're all just wishing for a few days of respite, I think, after what has been a huge year. So I'm feeling the same. I'm ready for a bit of a rest over those lovely few days, have some nice food, some nice wine, and get myself refreshed for what is going to be probably again another bumper year in local government. We've got some significant things that local government have to deliver on next year. So it's going to be a very busy year, but it's going to be a really exciting and rewarding year, being that it's the first year of the term. So we always love that first year when everybody's behaving, everybody's doing great work, and it'll all be good stories, won't it, Chris?
Absolutely. And Julie, a little tip, if people don't know if it's Christmas yet, maybe they need a Julie Reid LGX calendar to
Maybe
help
they
them through
do.
next year.
Yes,
Yeah, there's an
maybe.
idea.
I'll have to work that one out. Thank you.
And a final thought from Rhys.
Oh, just for those councillors who are listening, take a proper break over Christmas, and being elected and going through the induction process and everything else, particularly for brand new councillors, it's a lot. But being a councillor starting next year, it's not as full on. It does become manageable, but you do need to absolutely take the time to refresh and recharge. And Christmas, for those who are into Christmas, and clearly given my jacket, I'm one of those. Merry Christmas to those people. And for everyone else, have a wonderful break and come back refreshed in the new year. To governance staff particularly, who enjoy January, because for most of them, it's the 1 month a year where there's no council meeting. I'm sure Tony gets a break because people stop complaining about each other for a brief period at least. So I think we can all kind of rest, come back in the new year, and pick it up where we left off.
Excellent. All right, can't wait. All right, so that's all we have for you from TGU. My final thought is coming to you. JLF's been playing in the studio. I don't know how we managed to let him loose on an avatar version of me with a Christmas message to leave you with. I've really got two minds about this, so we'll leave it there and join you back in 2025. On behalf of all of us here at VLGA Connect, including the TGU panel, thank you for your support during 2024. We wish you the best for a happy and safe festive season. Do have a Merry Christmas, and we'll be back with you bigger and better than ever in 2025.